My name is Omer Azulai, and I have the honor to welcome you to the EGALA Israel podcast, Behind Words. I met our guest today in a workshop that I was participating in Ra'anana, and it was really amazing to see how deeply he was willing to practice Hebrew, and in every day how his Hebrew got better and better so fast. And for me, it was amazing to see the persistence and the growth mindset, which I think it's really crucial to the work in the EGALA model and for life in general, especially with people that want to be better version of themselves. I'm sorry about my mistake that I'm gonna do in English, but we're gonna do it in English, so be patient with me. And I think the first question I want to ask, Rob, it's what brought you to EGALA and to horses, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and from there we're gonna go on.
Okay, so thanks for asking me to be here to do this first, Omer, and thanks to all those people who tried to listen to my Hebrew at the workshop that Omer was talking about while I was breaking my teeth trying to speak it. Anyway, I didn't grow up on a ranch or a farm or anything. I grew up on the edge of a city, Akron, Ohio. When I was real young, like I'm 4, 5, 6, things weren't so good at home sometimes. And so I would go out, I'd go down the block. And on one of these walks, I found a little suburban, a home that had a tiny little barn for 2 ponies. So I could go and sit down right by the fence, get off the street, sit down there. It's nice green country, so they've got their heads down most of the time. But they're slowly coming over to the part of the fence where I was. For me, that was like 70 years ago. And I still remember how good that felt. And that's the first thing I think that stayed with me. The second thing was when I got into primary school and secondary school, I went to overnight camp where they had a stable with about 50 horses, including 3 teams of work horses. And we would swim in Lake Michigan with the horses. And we would do a couple of rodeos during the summer. And I got to be a good enough rider after a few years that they took me to horse shows. And that was real life for me, right? And then, my folks would come and pick me up. I'd have to like pretend that, what they wanted to do and what I was doing the rest of the year was real life. And for me, it really wasn't. But I did try to pick that up, or I did try to pick it up and put the horses away during my young adult life. And just, I'm not going to go through all the jobs that I had, right? Although some of the jobs might have been formative for what I did. I was a teacher for 15 years. I was a firefighter for about 5 years in the U.S. Forest Service. And so there were certain values that I picked up along the way there. And as I got older, relationships became a focus for me, but I couldn't do them very well, with humans. And at the same time, after my experience with kids teaching, I wanted to do more for them. So I got a guidance counselor's master's degree. So I had a little counseling experience. And one day while doing that master's, I went through the library. We did research in the library back then. And there was a part of the library that was the government documents. And so I looked at those shelves as I was walking by, and one of them said, the Bureau of Land Management Wild Horse and Burro Adoption Program. And I just stopped and I looked at the materials and I immediately took them out. It was just like there was this kind of a more alive experience that something like woke up inside me, right? On the surface, it was just that I became very interested in that. And from there, as I was finishing my master's, I found out that the BLM, we call it, the part of the government that manages most of the wild horses on Western land, started doing these adoptions that were a week long, where you could go and learn how to gentle wild horses. I was about 50 when I started doing that. It just, I mean, really, I kind of started living and breathing it. I went to half a dozen of these free week-long gentling experiences where you could learn, and then I became a kind of a clinician. You know, they usually had half a dozen professionals in the field, and so I did that, and then I got a job at a place in Southern California in the desert called Lifesavers Wild Horse Rescue. And we had about 140 horses on that property. They were separated 2 or 3 different ways, and it was all enclosed. So you could move the horses without having to halter them because most of them were untouchable. Our job was to try to gentle, not train, not break, gentle these horses so they might become, the end point for the training might be they are under saddle and riding somebody comfortably. But I mostly, as a choice, I wanted to work with them on the ground because there was something about doing what I got to do with a horse that had never been touched, to be able to establish a relationship with them without ever touching them, right? That it opened my heart. And it also opened my mind to all the things, or a lot of the things that can happen when somebody and a willing horse get together and have an experience together. And so we started doing these week-long trainings for people that wanted to come and learn how to gentle. And some of those people we were just there to do equestrian education. We weren't there to do therapy or any kind of a social learning or anything like that. We were teaching various people who were interested in getting with these horses how to do it. And they still, every once in a while, somebody would have this growth moment, like I worked with a client who had a memory arise that was, she had a traumatic accident, had a big scar on her chest, being able to overcome what she was feeling when she first started working with this Mustang helped her remember that. She ended up adopting the Mustang, even though she had very little experience. And she ended up being healthy. She found out she had a lot of grief about what had happened in her life. And so an inner trauma. And so at least with the little bit of counseling experience I had in my master's, I said, I told her, why don't you write a grief letter? And then when you bring it back, or if you want to bring it back tomorrow, you can decide whatever you want to do with it. And it like I said, it was so meaningful for her that she adopted the horse. And there were several other people and pairs of people that came together who had these experiences that were also deeply meaningful for them. So instead of just being there to help them learn how to touch a horse, ask it to move and change directions and be able to put a halter and lead rope on it, I started doing the other things that were coming to these folks. And so one of the people that had one of these moments that I worked with her and a Mustang, they were almost eye to eye, very close. And that was a big experience for her and for the Mustang, because this Mustang was typically very active and a runner. And so I guided her through that. She came out of the pen and we debriefed. And then at that point I said, because I had looked up EGALA on the internet after all of these experiences, unplanned experiences with clients was happening. And so I told her, there's this model of working with people around experiences that they had like you. And she said, I'm a marriage and family therapist. We're going to do that. We're going to get trained. She just interrupted me, mentioned that she was already a therapist. And so that's what we did. Like we went to the first training we could go to in a town called Temecula, I think. And so that was like 2003. And then, it was part 1 and part 2 then. So we went to part 2 in 2005, I think. And then we started our own little business.
God intervention. I have a few questions to go back on a few of the stuff that you said.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, you said to open your heart and open your mind. Okay? I'm asking, what is it about the horses that is opening heart or mind, or how does it happening?
Well, all I can do is really describe it. I mean, the heart was just beyond words. I mean, the work we were doing was a combination of taking what we were learning from other professionals and being able to apply it ourselves. And for me, like I said, a lot of that was on the ground. And there's this one old timer named John Sharp who would first touch the horses with a 12-foot bamboo pole, right? Bamboo is a grass, and so it smelled like grass to them. And you could still touch them once they got comfortable with being touched with it from 12 feet away, which was about the average distance that they're going to take off if they can anyway, when you're in a quiet situation. And so you touch them on the sweet spot where their moms first leaned over and put their mouth on their necks to get them to get up and nurse, soon after birth, so they remember that spot, right? So we call it a sweet spot. So that's where you start with the touching them with the bamboo pole. And then there was a process where you desensitize, you basically ran the pole all over them at a certain cadence, right? like the bow of a fiddle. And you also went around their body in a certain step by step also. And then the rest of the gentling proceeded from there. And so mentally and in my mind, I had to take the experience I was seeing from the professionals and apply it to what was happening in the pen with the horse that I had. But there was a whole other component of the experience that part of it translated completely into my insides, and the other part, to my heart, and the other part translated to, translated what I had in my heart to the understanding of body position and body language and being able to take where I was at my heart and expose it to the horse, and have myself be comfortable at the same time while I'm doing this, quote, work that I'm supposed to be doing. And so that's what I meant by mind and heart, and actually it was mind, body, and heart, right?
Yeah.
Because the horse knows just from looking at you, and then maybe if you're close enough, feeling your electrical field. And then, then it's the horse's choice, right? And so, that's the other thing I learned. It was always the horse's choice, which was, that's a great metaphor that was a great metaphor for me at the time too. It's like not to force, don't force something that you want to happen. So even just in that work of doing the gentling with these horses, people were learning how to be better human beings. I was learning how to be a better human being and better with horses. And there was kind of a silent communication experience that happened. Like I can remember more than once, you basically take the time it takes to fiddle with the pole while you're holding it with your other, with your other hand. But at the same time, you kind of move up the pole, your feet are moving maybe 2 inches at a time, and you do things like you quit before the horse bolts, you quit while the horse is comfortable and everything else connected to that. But at a certain point, your hand is going to be right next, it's going to be a foot away on the pole from the horse that's never been touched. There were times when I just said to myself, this horse is going to let me touch it now. That was the experience. It's hard to describe, except that it was a whole mind, body, heart experience, right? I even said it out loud to myself one time. Nobody was around, we were all in different parts of the ranch working with our horses. And I thought, I wish somebody was here.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it was that kind of experience which connected me, A, to the horses, and then B, to EGALA. Because I didn't know what EGALA was going to help me go forward with when I took the first training. But by the end of the first training, I could see that, as far as connecting with the horses and being with the horses as a teammate, that was definitely going to be part of it.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, Omer, I could talk about this stuff all night,
Amazing. I'm here to listen. And I think with so much experience, I have question about
Sure.
the stories. I really, really love every time I'm meeting someone who does EGALA, and I like, tell me 1 or 3 stories that you saw that magic moment in the arena, like the mind, body, spirit connection, or
Oh, when working with clients, you mean?
yes.
For the last 5 years, I've been working at a farm part-time where all of our clients are veterans, or they're veterans' families. We had an individual ex-Marine, or not an ex-Marine, a Marine, you're always a Marine. We had a Marine who came to our monthly groups. She came as an individual client 3 or 4 times, and then we didn't see her for a while. And then, like maybe a month or 2, something like that. She made an appointment, came in. We typically do just an informal check-in. Sometimes we sit down in the barn. Sometimes we stand outside the barn and talk. We asked her how she was doing, how was her last few weeks. And she said, oh, everything was fine. Everything was, good. And then she took about 1 breath and she said, but when I get out of here, I'm going to go ballistic. What else did she say? She said, and I know how to dodge bullets. And so, that was its own mind-body experience, mind-body-heart experience for me, right before we even started the work with the horses. As a mental health professional, I had to think about, without interpreting or jumping the gun, so to speak, reacting too fast or too soon. I had to do some kind of a protocol about suicidality.
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, in a way that we could sort of calmly talk about it, not be face to face or hand to hand, but be alongside her, right? Kind of alongside. And so I asked the questions and talked about it. In the meantime, me and my equine specialist were looking at back and forth at each other and stuff like that. There came a thought that I had that seemed to match with, it matched with where the horses were, for one thing. They were out in one of the pastures that was 2 or 3 acres and green. It was green with wildflowers and grass. And so I pictured that. I thought about where she was at and took a chance that my thoughts on her suicidality were appropriate and she wasn't going to run away, and looked at my equine specialist and said, maybe we could, we became a 3, right? Like our client was involved in this creation of what we were going to do too, or our client, I should say. So I looked at my equine specialist and looked at our client and I said, well, maybe we could just go out and find a quiet place in the pasture where the horses are, and we could sit down and go over what's going on with you that got you here, that got us to this point. And she said, yeah, we could do that. That's what we did. We walked out there. So far, this is just, my mind trying to be active with my role as a mental health professional and, like a social worker, and my heart and the way that my body was telling me what was happening, to be a companion. I just felt like it just felt like I needed to be something bigger than a social worker, just like the horses are something bigger than social workers, but they also do something that they can do. And so that's what we did. We walked out there. We sat, we sat down in a fairly comfortable spot, roughly in the middle of this 2-acre pasture. I was watching her body language. Her body language seemed to be down, at least externally, on the outside, relaxed. Her focus was in, where we were and in the present. We allowed her to tell us what was going on. And so she told us this story about what was happening in her life then that made it very difficult for her with other people in her family, and that she had to do something about it. It was based on their dynamics and her relationships within the family. I'm not going to go into that detail now. At a certain point, she said, "I'm not going to go back there and kill anybody." She said, I just want to do something that is going to be something I've never done before, in a way that was very assertive, very assertive. And those weren't her exact words. But while she was talking, or while we were all talking, the horses were, how horses will graze. They'll have their heads down. They'll look up a little and they'll take 2 or 3 paces, and then put their heads down again. So they were doing that in our direction. And by the time we got to her talking about where she was really at and what was happening, the horses were 3 or 4 of them were standing around our little circle of 3. And so we had these 3 or 4 big bodies around us, and these heads halfway down towards us, not eating. Every once in a while, one of them would move off a little bit and graze, get a mouthful. And they'll have their heads down. They'll look up a little and they'll take 2 or 3 paces, and then put their heads down again. So they were doing that in our direction. And by the time we got to her talking about where she was really at and what was happening, the horses were 3 or 4 of them were standing around our little circle of 3. And so we had these 3 or 4 big bodies around us, and these heads halfway down towards us, not eating. Every once in a while, one of them would move off a little bit and graze, get a mouthful. And, there we are in our circle. I mean, literally making peace in the present, coming up with a plan for the future, the immediate future. The horses, they were just being with us in our present, with what we do as human beings, while they were just being themselves. I really did feel like they were supporting us. I could get emotional about it. So not only was I there for trying to be there as a companion and with an open heart for the client, and, with my equine specialist, that the horses seemed to have open hearts for us. And I still was able to go back and forth between, or within, not between, but within, within that shared experience, and still do all of the things that I needed to do as a social worker, right? I didn't just have to be a social worker in a box. I could, with the horses and with our shared experience on, mind, body, and heart levels, I was able to then have the discussion about what I would need to do as a social worker. Like I had to say, so, after what we discussed, I'm going to need to notify social services, city social services, to report what you told us. She said she understood there had been a social worker there once before, and she understood my situation, and she understood the necessity for me to make the call. But then I said, do you want to be on the call with me? We can make the call together, or I can be there and you can make the call and talk instead of me. And she said, no, that's okay. You make the call and I'll start doing what she said I'll go home and I'll start putting into, not these words exactly, but putting into practice what we talked about. She said, I'm much more clear. I know what I need to do to stick up for my point of view, and I don't have to be aggressive, but I can still be assertive about what I think needs to happen. And then the next time we talked, and that's what happened. We got up, went back to the barn, nice and calmly. She left, and we looked at each other, me and my ES, just for a few seconds. And then later on, she, in another week or so, either I took her number because she was willing to give it in this situation, or she asked me to take it. And so I called her, and she said things were working out the way that we had figured out in the pasture. And then I think she came back to a few of we call the groups comrades in arms. She came back to 2 or 3 of those, and then she came back and did a closing individual, because she said because of her work life, she couldn't keep coming to the groups because of her feeling about wanting to go forward and not coming to the barn anymore. She said she wanted to close. We closed our time with her with that one amazing appointment that she had that I've just described. I mean, that was basically our last appointment with her, except for the closing appointment.
Wow, amazing. I'm going to take a few notes, at least so I can be able to build kind of model from it and to create a progress. First thing is the ability to experience, or at least to be aware of something, and then the ability to feel it. Okay? When we feel some stuff emotionally, it helps us to accept it, and then to let that energy to go out when necessary, if necessary, and then the ability to think and act differently. So what you said about the horses that are with us or allowing us is to open our hearts, to open our mind, and then to behave differently, or to experiment or test up something that might be more beneficial for us. So if I need to wrap it up into a model, that's one thing that I'm taking. And the other big takeaway that I'm going to take from today is I think what you described about the curiosity to everything, and to come from that curiosity, what I can learn for the person that I'm working with. Or in a weird way, always the spiritual side of working with horses is getting less attention. And I thought we will take the other questions and we'll create another chapter regard to the spirit side of working with horses.